Welcome to the deep dive. We take a stack of sources and, well, we try to pull out the knowledge you need fast.
Yep, cut through the noise.
Exactly. Today we're diving into the pretty complex world of Mark W. Gaffney's writings.
Right. We've got articles, bits from his book, A Blinding Light on the Road to Damascus.
And even his chats with Microsoft Copilot, which is interesting in itself.
Definitely.
So our goal here is to unpack his unique take on, well, a few big things. Middle East geopolitics, especially Syria.
The whole problem of information overload making it hard to understand.
And his, let's call it a metaphysical view of current events. It's quite a mix.
It really is. And what's compelling, I think, is how he braids them all together. History, conflict, philosophy, religion, it's all in there.
And for listeners who caught our previous deep dives, the one on the Project Abraham Google Notebook.
Ah, yes, the HTS confusion.
Right. There was some lack of clarity about support for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS.
Yeah. And that confusion, partly from just so much information, it actually demonstrates the challenge Gaffney himself talks about.
Perfectly put. So that's our mission today, to unpack Gaffney's arguments, see where he's coming from, using his writings and that AI dialogue.
Okay, let's do it. Where should we start? The Syrian conflict.
Yeah, let's start there. The geopolitics are messy, to say the least. And Gaffney jumps right in, saying we're swamped with information.
Overloaded.
Yeah.
He uses that striking phrase, Satan's simulated virtual reality.
It's a powerful image. Suggests we're not seeing things clearly because there's just too much noise.
Exactly. And he connects this directly to his analysis of the Trump and Netanyahu plan. He predicts it's not going to end well.
How so? What does he see happening?
He thinks it's likely to spark another Arab Spring and critically lead to the destruction of what he calls God's house of Israel.
That's a huge claim. And it's rooted in his reading of the power dynamics.
Deeply. He looks back at the history, points out the shifting U.S. support for different rebel groups.
Including HTS, at times, fighting against Assad's Baath government.
Right. It's not a simple good guys, bad guys story. Never is it?
No. And then you have the other side. Assad getting support from Iran.
And Gaffney frames Iran as essentially a proxy for Russia and China.
Okay.
And their goal, according to Gaffney's analysis, establishing an Islamic caliphate, eventually in Jerusalem.
Wow. Okay, so that really does complicate the narrative. You can see why just looking at headlines wouldn't give you this picture.
Not at all. And it brings us back to that HTS point. Gaffney himself apparently expressed support for them in the past.
Which caused that confusion we mentioned, even for the AI.
Understandably, because, and this is the key thing,
HTS is designated a terrorist group by a lot of countries, including the U.S.
Precisely. So you're left wondering, why would Gaffney, who seems to be aiming for peace, support a group like that? It's a big question.
It really is. And it leads nicely into the second theme, information overload and AI.
Right. Gaffney himself apparently reflected on this. He mentioned giving, a 360-page manuscript?
Yeah, for a 15-minute segment or something.
Way too much, probably. He sort of admits it might have just swamped the AI.
It's a fascinating point about AI, isn't it? Even advanced systems can get overwhelmed or maybe misinterpret if the input isn't focused.
Garbage in, garbage out. Or maybe just, too much in, confusion out. The HTS mix-up seems like a prime example.
Okay, so we've got the complex politics, the info overload challenge. Now for the really unique part, Gaffney's metaphysical lens.
This is where it gets quite deep. He looks at current events, particularly in the Middle East,
Through the story of St. Paul on the road to Damascus, the blinding light experience.
Yes, but he doesn't just see it as history. He connects it to this philosophical idea, Unus Mundus.
Unus Mundus. Pauli and Jung, right?
That's them. The idea that there's an underlying unity, that events aren't always separate, that there can be meaningful coincidences, synchronicity.
Gaffney sees the St. Paul story as like a recurring pattern, manifesting now.
Kind of, yeah. A pattern of meaningful coincidence, maybe explained by quantum ideas, relativity. He even ties in Einstein.
Yeah.
It's a big conceptual leap.
And he takes it personally, doesn't he? He talks about being a prophet.
He does. He states his belief that he's called to help people see the Spirit of God working within events today.
And he notes very pointedly that Damascus is the capital of Syria.
The literal connection, it's very intentional. For him, it's not just politics, it's a spiritual drama playing out.
So to get another perspective, he actually talked this through with Microsoft Copilot.
He did. And Copilot's response was actually pretty insightful.
What did it say?
Well, it acknowledged the complexity of Gaffney's view, the mix of geopolitics, personal belief, and this metaphysical layer.
Did it summarize the situation?
Yeah, it laid out the basics. Assad's support network, Iran, Russia, China, and the West's indirect support for rebels, including the controversial HTS.
Okay.
And significantly, Copilot also flagged the information overload problem independently.
Interesting. So it's not just Gaffney feeling that way.
Seems not. And Copilot tackled the metaphysics, too. Explained. Unus Mundus. Noted how Gaffney applies it.
But did it sort of challenge him on the HTS support, for example?
It did raise the ethical questions. You know, given HTS's designation, what are the moral implications of supporting them? It didn't offer an answer, but it posed the question.
That shows a certain level of processing, beyond just repeating facts. It engaged with the ethical dimension.
Exactly.
What about the history? Did Copilot confirm Gaffney's points about U.S. policy shifting?
It did. It confirmed the U.S. initially backed the Baath government, but things soured dramatically during the Arab Spring because of the violent crackdown.
Right, so policy isn't fixed. It changes. That's crucial context.
Absolutely crucial. It wasn't always us versus them in the way it seems now.
Gaffney also brings in economics, doesn't he? Worries about wasted money.
Yeah, he talks about billions potentially lost on failed investments in foreign governments. And he raises the question, will the U.S. State Department ever recognize HTS?
And what's the current status on that, according to Copilot?
Well, no official recognition currently. And given the terrorist designation, it's highly unlikely right now.
Are there conditions? Like, what would it take for the U.S. to recognize a new Syrian government?
Copilot laid out the usual benchmarks. Denounce terrorism, protect minorities, get rid of chemical weapons. Standard international stuff.
Okay, and Gaffney's vision is that future investments should actually help people globally.
That's his plea. A more responsible, people-focused approach, not just strategic chess moves.
Which seems to lead into his Project Abraham idea.
Directly, he argues HTS is actually in a tight spot diplomatically. Full U.S. backing might even cost them support at home.
Because
it would look like puppetry, maybe, undermine their nationalist credentials. That instability, Gaffney suggests, calls for something different.
Enter Project Abraham.
Exactly. He frames it as this global movement, trying to revive the shared roots of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity.
The Abrahamic faiths.
Right. With the goal of uplifting God's house of Israel, but making it a house of prayer for all nations, quoting Isaiah. It's about unity.
So the aim is to dial down the conflict by focusing on common ground.
Pretty much. Get nations to lay down weapons, use reason, talk within the UN framework. Peace through shared values and diplomacy.
How did Copilot react to that vision?
Quite positively, actually. It saw the potential for reconciliation, emphasizing shared ancestry and the need for dialogue. Liked the concept.
Gaffney also talks about how our thinking process itself can cause problems.
Yeah, cognitive processing. He wrote about how processing political ideologies can lead to, he called it, psychopathology in humans and AI.
Psychopathology. How does he...
He suggests the wholeness of truth gets broken apart, fragmented when we process these rigid ideologies, and that leads to like an infinite loop of conflict, repeating patterns.
It's an interesting psychological angle on political division.
It is, and linking back to shared heritage, Copilot confirms something interesting.
What's that?
That the Prophet Muhammad revered the Torah, the Jewish holy book.
Really highlights the interconnectedness, doesn't it? Deep historical links.
Absolutely. Common origins. Gaffney uses this to argue that our current wars show how far we've drifted from these fundamental truths, from the Word of God.
He thinks focusing just on, like, competitive advantage, evolutionary strategy, disconnects us.
That's his argument. He calls that Satan's strategy and says it pulls religions away from their core. He quotes Santayana.
Those who do not learn from history
are condemned to repeat it. Exactly. Ignoring these deeper connections keeps us stuck in cycles of violence, he believes.
Okay, so given all this, what does he propose doing? He has some specific plans, right? Pretty bold ones.
Oh, yeah. Very specific. He talks about volunteering to go to Jerusalem for Orthodox Easter in 2025.
To do what?
To take the Holy Fire to. And he uses this specific term, the new annexed nation of Eastern Donbass People's Republic.
Wow. Okay. And that's not all.
No. He also plans to lead unarmed UN peacekeepers to start building the third temple in Jerusalem.
Leading UN peacekeepers to build the temple? That's ambitious.
Highly unconventional, yes. Linking spiritual goals with direct action in conflict zones.
He also mentions Putin, doesn't he? In relation to ancestral unity.
He does. He references Putin's talk about unity and basically suggests Putin should embrace God's plan. He even brings up St. Vladimir adopting Christianity in Russia, drawing a historical parallel.
Implying a potential for a similar shift now.
That seems to be the implication. And this ties into Ukraine. He proposes that maybe Ukraine and Russia could surrender the disputed Donbas territory.
Surrender it to whom?
To God, essentially. Create a UN peacekeeping buffer zone there. Protect both sides.
A neutral zone.
Yes. He connects this to his writings on neutrality in Donbas, and even to prophecies about the conversion of Russia, like those associated with Fatima.
So again, it's geopolitics, history, and prophecy all woven together in his proposals.
Absolutely. It's a complete synthesis of his worldview.
And then he goes even deeper into the nature of divine communication itself.
He does. He describes the Word of God not just as text, but as fundamental truths written into prophets, almost like quantum data.
Quantum data. Like it from bit, Wheeler's idea.
Exactly that kind of concept. Quantum particleization of semantic binary data is his phrase.
Okay. And he talks about a quantum wave function language.
Yeah, a higher language of love used by God involving photons and electrons. He even interprets saints' halos as biophoton energy.
Biophotons. Wow. And writing itself is a quantum calculation.
A miraculous mathematical quantum calculation connecting us to the cosmic mind. It's a very specific framework.
He contrasts this with people looking for flashy miracles.
Right. He says, an evil, wicked generation looks for miracles, but the real miracle is life, creation itself. He quotes Romans. God understood through creation.
It's quite poetic almost, the photon analogy, playing a harp in a celestial orchestra.
It is, emphasizing interconnectedness. He also mentions quantum superposition, infinite learning, the value of consciousness, photon activity in neurons.
Connects it to Chopra and Kafados's book, You Are the Universe.
Yep, and leaves us with that question, what is the universe trying to communicate to you today?
So, tying it all back, Project Abraham is the way to reconnect, to escape the simulated reality.
That's how he presents it. Disconnection leads to wandering blindly. Project Abraham is like planting the mustard seed in Gaza, a small start to guide us back to God's love.
And he suggests the potential new Syrian government, even HTS, should invest in it.
Yes, as part of this bigger spiritual reset, aligning with God's plan instead of Satan's strategy.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Hopefully, listeners have a clearer picture of Mark Gaffney's very interwoven perspectives.
We covered a lot. The complex geopolitics, the info overload, and his very distinct metaphysical and spiritual framework.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. But hopefully breaking it down, connecting the dots between U.S. policy, quantum physics, biblical interpretation, hopefully that sparks some aha moments.
We hope so. It's about understanding these intricate issues more efficiently, seeing the connections.
And obviously we need to stress, these are Gaffney's specific viewpoints from the sources we looked at.
Absolutely. But they offer a unique, definitely thought-provoking way to look at world events, that intersection of politics, tech, and spirituality.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Go for it.
Considering everything we've discussed, the geopolitical maneuvering, the metaphysical patterns Gaffney sees, the calls for spiritual unity through Project Abraham, what single underlying force do you think most shapes global events? Is it power, ideas, faith, economics, something else entirely?
That's a big question. And maybe how do we as individuals navigate all this complexity with more clarity?
Yeah. Something to reflect on. We encourage everyone to keep thinking about these issues and form their own informed perspectives.